Disclaimer. The views expressed on this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek are solely the opinions of the host and the guest. The content of the conversation is not reflective of the institutions or establishments mentioned therein. Take all these opinions with a pinch of salt and a dash of lime if needed.
Well, if only there was another person talking about this on the internet, right? Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whenever you're watching or listening, and welcome to this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. I don't know if that initial statement was a bit of a giveaway, but I will be putting a bit of a spin on it, so to speak. And like last week's solo episode, I'll just be rattling the thoughts that come out, that flow in my mind out to the camera and to you listening or watching. So yeah, I mean, if that wasn't a spoiler in itself, I will be talking about the Will Smith and the Chris Rock situation that had happened at the Oscars over the weekend. Because, we needed more people talking about it on the internet, so why not? I'm being facetious there. But anyway, but the spin that I'm going to be putting on this is more so from a perspective of anger and how it can cloud one's judgment. Before I get into the crux of that, though, I do want to say that there's enough conversation out there about all of this. I honestly don't care what side you fall on, if you're all for Will Smith doing it or all against Will Smith doing it. I honestly, it's not something that's rattled my world, so to speak. But I do find it interesting to talk about because of, I guess implication is the wrong word, but what's the word I'm looking for? Because that's something, it's something that we can ask ourselves in the sense that, would we do something like that if we were in a position of that kind? Now again, not many of us are probably going to end up at the Oscars. I mean, if your goal is that, more power to you. I hope you get there. But it's interesting to sort of think about how a person can make an impulsive decision. Because I can be quite the impulsive decision maker in the best of my days and in the worst of my days. So I've had my moments of being impulsive more than once. But to sort of bring in the anger perspective onto it, I've had moments where I have been impulsive because of my anger. And in no way is this me justifying the actions that happened over the weekend. Because there is a huge difference between justifying one's actions and empathizing with them. To me, empathizing with one's actions is more so an attempt from your end to understand where the person is possibly coming from. Maybe they were going through a bad time. Maybe they had a lot on their mind and that was the tipping point for them to where they just did that thing and so on and so forth, I think that is empathizing. Whereas justifying is saying that, yeah, he did the right thing because X, Y, and Z. In no way am I justifying his actions, but in some sense, I'm just trying to empathize with his actions through this. So yeah, let's get into it. I personally have not watched the full show. I've only watched clips of that occurrence through many different podcasts and them playing it and even watching it someplace else and so on. So I'm just going to share my initial perspectives on the whole situation. So Chris Rock makes a joke, who, for those of you who don't know, is a famous comedian in the United States. Makes a joke about Jada Pinkett Smith, who is Will Smith's wife. She is suffering with a disorder known as alopecia, where people tend to lose their hair. And he made a joke about G.I. Jane, which is this movie character who is also bald. And if you look at the video, you will catch a glimpse of Will Smith actually laughing at the joke as well. But you do notice Jada rolling her eyes. Now, again, like I mentioned earlier, there's many different schools of thought, or schools of thought, I should say, that are looking at it from many different angles. Some people are saying that Will wants to sort of show that he's a dominating family man and blah, blah, blah. And some people are also saying that the bigger context or the larger context to it is the history that the family has been having lately with Will and Jada's relationship being in question and so on and so forth. As I'm talking about it, there's a part of my mind that's asking me, why am I talking about gossip like this? I don't know. But here we are. I am talking about it on a full-fledged episode, so we're going to make it through. So that's the basic gist of what happened, and some sort of thoughts that people have about the motivations behind Will Smith's actions. If you ask me, should he have done it? No, 100% not. For someone who is of that stature, and I'm never going to understand the stature. I'm never going to understand from the stature that he is at, because I am not there. So I'm not going to know what he's looking at. However, since this is just a random guy on the internet sharing his opinion, like the billion other people that are doing it, I'm going to share my opinion too. So basically, yeah, to me, should he have done it? No, 100% not. Actually, my colleagues and I were talking about this briefly at work as well, and this question came up. Should he have done it? And to me, the answer was always no. In that I personally felt there was a better way of handling it. It didn't have to result in someone walking on stage during a show that's being broadcasted around the world, regardless of how many people are watching it. That's another discussion for another day. But for someone to walk up on stage during a live show and to show that level of aggression. Now, yes, he just slapped him, and it could have been a lot worse. What if Chris Rock retaliated? What if it turned into a full-on fight? What would have happened then? Who knows? These are all just sort of questions that are popping up in hindsight as we're talking about it. But anyway, for me, I think the better way to handle it, or the better way to have handled it, would have been to handle it backstage. To handle it one-on-one. To maybe openly, or Will could have openly told Chris Rock, like, look, I know we're here to make jokes, we're here to make fun of each other, we're here to roast each other, but please stay away from talking about my wife. Would that have worked? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. As I'm talking about this, and as I said, I'm going to be spitting out the thoughts that are coming into my head, so take this how you will. But there's another part of me that asks if this was performative, if this was a setup, if this was them in cohorts with maybe the organizers and the producers of the show, doing this to drum up the interest that we've been seeing all over the internet over the past few days. Again, I don't know. Will we ever know? Again, I don't know. However, there is a part of me that tends to ask, does this performative, or was this performative in some sense? Performative to show dominance, or performative to show a sense of control, whatever it may be. Do I have the answer to that? No. I believe Will Smith is the only person, and maybe Jada, if he talks to her about it, are probably the only people that have an answer, to this. Which brings me to my initial point that I made, which I will be talking about mainly. Was this all just an impulsive action in the split second that led him to walk up on stage and slap Chris Rock on the face? It possibly could have been. The thing is that with anger, and I'm speaking as someone who has been an angry child, or an angry teenager growing up, I should say, more than a child. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I won't necessarily get into that now. Maybe it's a conversation for another day. But I've known what it feels like to be angry. I've known what it feels like to be angry towards other people. And trust me, it's not nice. It sucks. And in the heat of the moment, I've been in positions where I've made impulsive decisions in anger that I shouldn't have done. Now, again, I'm not saying that what happened with Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith, or between them and Chris Rock, is similar to what has happened with me in the past. They're very different things with different contexts, and it's a different world altogether. So there is no way that I can necessarily overlap them and compare them to be the same. But I can speak from the aspect of anger possibly clouding judgment. If you notice your thoughts in moments like that, you will know that there's a ton of things happening. There's a ton of things firing in your head, wanting you to do something. Your ego is kicking in, your subconscious, blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of things that are spitting thoughts at you, suggesting actions to you that you should make in order to either show dominance, one up the other person, make a point, etc. We've all been there in some way or another. If might not have been anger, but might have been something else. We've all had those moments where we've had certain thoughts just jump at us, and we just pick one action impulsively and act on it. Now, no, I'm not here to justify if that is right or wrong, but that is just the way we are as humans. We tend to act on impulse sometimes because we don't necessarily pay attention to the thoughts that are in our mind. There's this very interesting thought that comes from some stoic philosophy that I'd read on Ryan Holiday's Instagram page. And for those of you who don't know, Ryan Holiday is author, and he ponders or writes a lot about, he writes a lot about Stoicism and Stoic philosophers and so on and so forth. So there is this thought that has stayed in my mind ever since I read it on his Instagram page, which talked about reaction time. The reaction time between stimulus and response. If I'm not mistaken, the quote was something along the lines of, the longer the reaction time, the better your ability to make a good decision. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is taking that extra second or two before you jump into doing something. I can explain this with a bit of a story. Now, for anonymity's sake, or anonymity, however you say that word, I am not going to mention the characters involved in the story, except for myself, because I was involved in the story. But I will, those of you listening to this who were sort of around, or I was around during this time, probably know this story, and I might have told the story to some other people as well in private. So you might sort of join the dots and know what I'm talking about. However, I will just give you the sort of skeleton of the story, wherein I was in school. I was probably in the 8th or 9th grade, and I used to study in India. And there was this very common phenomenon where kids would pair a boy with a girl. Call it for what it is. It's kids being kids, the dumbasses that we are as kids. And whenever I would be called, or whenever my name would be paired with a certain person's name, excuse me, I'm shaking a lot of this today. I'm talking with a lot of passion, so I apologize if the camera is shaking. What was I saying? Yeah, so whenever my name was paired with this other person's name, I would get really angry. It would really grind my gears. And this had nothing to do with that person specifically. It was more so my childish emotions and my inability to sort of deal with those emotions, I would say. But again, I was a child, so I was a teenager, I should say, not a child, but I was a teenager, so I don't want to be too rough on myself. But anyway, this goes back to 8th or 9th grade, where someone said something by pairing me and this person. We were in the library at that time, and there was probably about 10 or 15 odd people around there. When I heard this come from a certain person in the room, my initial impulsive reaction was to take a bottle full of water, which is probably like a liter or 2-liter water bottle, that was made with a sort of hard shell plastic, and I just tossed the bottle in a direction. This bottle hit the person who was sitting around there, and if I'm not mistaken, this was the person that said something about me and this other person. And yes, it was a girl, but like I said, I want to keep this anonymous because, just for privacy's sake, I suppose. Anyway, I threw this bottle in a direction, and as I ask myself now, I don't think that I intentionally threw it towards this other person, but I ended up doing it anyway. This person was recovering from a fractured arm, and her arm had only come out of her cast, or the cast, I believe, not that long ago, probably like a week or two or something, if I'm remembering the details of the story correctly. When that happened, that anger that I had in that one moment switched into a feeling of fuck. Now, I was later called into the principal's office for this, and I was told a few things. I was also told that I might have to pay if this person broke their arm again. Luckily, knock on wood, this person did not break their arm again. And she was okay. But this brings me back to acting on impulse. In that moment of anger, I took a bottle and threw it at her. What if I would have taken just an extra second to think about what I was going to do? Now, again, like I said, I was a teenager, so again, this is in no way me justifying that action. It is not a justification because I'd be foolish to justify that action. It was totally wrong. I shouldn't have done that. And I probably will never do that again. But I'm just talking about it from the perspective of reaction times based off that stoic philosophy that I just mentioned. The amount of time it took me to react in that situation was probably less than a couple of seconds. I heard the comment, and within the next second or two, the bottle was in the air. So thinking about it now, it makes me laugh at myself in the sense of how angry of a child I was, or a teenager, I should say. Well, I guess I was still a child to my parents. Anyway, I digress. Things could have gotten a lot worse. For God's sakes, I could have hit a teacher who was walking into the library. That would definitely would have been a lot worse. A lot of the times we tend to act on impulse, not thinking about what those actions might lead to. Now, you're never gonna know what's gonna happen in the future. I would like to assume, assuming it's not always that great, but I'd like to assume that Will Smith didn't know what would happen next. Or maybe he did, who knows, if it was staged. But you can never really know what's going to happen in the future, but there is this other school of thought that talks about analyzing the possible outcomes of your actions and then taking an action if you will be able to deal with its consequences. Did I think about that in that moment? Of course not. For me, it was all about just, I need to let my anger explode. I need to let it out there, like, fly in the air, you bottle. In that moment, I wasn't thinking about that. Was Will Smith thinking about that? Again, I don't know. I'm not Will Smith. But it's interesting to think about this sort of framework of freedom and consequences. In the sense that someone might be living in a country where they have freedom of speech. However, I personally am a believer of the fact that you don't necessarily have freedom from those consequences. In that case, are you actually really free? Again, that's a topic of conversation for another day. But to tie a bow on all of this, anger clouds your judgment. Anger, in most cases, doesn't allow you to think twice before you do something. Your mind, in that moment of anger, will have the ability to justify your actions. It will have the ability to justify them to be right, even though an hour later you might yourself say that you did something wrong. I grew up as an angry teenager, again, like I said, because of some of my own problems, which again, I'll not go into today, but I maybe might talk about it down the road. And letting anger decide the next step, to me, at this point in life, is a bit of a fool's game. It's a bit of a fool's game if you're letting your anger and frustration impulsively make a decision. Now, again, this is going into the granular details of what anger is and internal versus external anger, internalizing the anger versus putting it out into the world, etc., etc. People are known to use their anger and channel it to do good for themselves. So, I won't go as far as saying that all anger is bad. I think what I am saying, though, is when your anger leads to an action in the external world that might have consequences you might not be ready for, maybe you should take that extra second before you decide to do that thing. Maybe you should take that extra minute before you decide to kick someone in the face or slap someone in the face. And this is for myself too. This is for myself as a human being. We are all very impressionable species and can make mistakes over time. But it's realizing that reaction time. The longer you can give yourself to react from a certain stimulus that hits you, the safer you might be in terms of rationally dealing with a situation. Again, maybe I didn't talk about this necessarily, but as I said the word rational, it sort of sparked a thought in my mind about rationality versus irrationality and how that can affect us too. But again, I won't go into another rabbit hole with that. But I'll bring this to a close, I should say. Excuse me. With this thought of giving yourself enough time before you react. Don't let anger cloud your judgment, because you might not be ready for what's on the other side. Yeah, with that, sorry, I went into a bit of a thought there, a deep thought, I should say, about whether or not I should expand more. But if I do, I'll probably start reiterating the same things over and over again. I've probably talked about reaction time for probably the 100th time at this point. So I'll call it good for now. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Perspective Platoon with Prateek. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen or watch and be a part of this platoon of perspectives. I've lately been going through a phase of self-doubt where I've been questioning what I'm doing. And again, I apologize if I'm shaking this camera too much. I should stop. I'll maybe move my hands away from this table. But yeah, I have had moments where I've been questioning all of this. I do really want to give this as much as I possibly can, give it my 100%, even if I only have 50% in me. So it really means a lot to me if one person's watching this at least for a couple of minutes. I've rambled on for about 25, 26 something minutes now, but even if you watch it for a minute, I'd really appreciate it. I really appreciate it, rather. Now, I'm not saying that you can just watch this for 2 minutes and go away, you know. I'd love for you to watch the whole video and share your thoughts in the comments or by DMing me on Instagram at Random Relatability, links for which you can find in the description or the show notes. So, you know, really thankful for you guys being a part of this. So thank you. Don't let anger cloud your judgment. We can all relate to have been in those positions, but we can always also strive to become better human beings, because we all relate to that as well. We all want to be the better versions of ourselves, be it emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically, financially, etc. So I wish you the best. Thank you for listening. I love you and I appreciate you. And yeah, that is it. So let me try and close this with my catchphrase as usual. Don't forget to keep your mind open to different perspectives, because you never know, random relatability might just be around the corner. Take care.